Hello and welcome back to any returning listeners to the podcast. If this is your first time listening, my name is Heidi El Pinto. Last year, I started my own small business called Pulp where I distribute movie serials, TV shows, and feature films, all with roots in Pulp Fiction. This is my podcast, One on One, where I take people that I admire off social media and I force them to be my friend for half an hour. Uh, Today, I have a very special guest. I don't have someone that just likes movies or likes to talk about movies. I have someone who teaches in film, who's a professor. I feel very fancy
Oh, yes,
today.
very fancy.
And of course, you just heard her right now. You know her as a femme noir on Twitter, as I include her in my Follow Fridays every week. But this is Laura Kendall.
Hi, and thanks for that. I do appreciate the follow Fridays. That's wonderful.
Oh yeah, of course. Just because I noticed people were doing that a lot. Like I didn't start doing that, I think, until like the second half of the year, and I just wanted to do it like a little differently. And so I hope it doesn't seem like pandering at all because I don't know. I like doing the wonderful women of film Twitter.
No, I mean, you know how cutthroat Twitter can be. So whenever there's love, I think it's a good thing.
Exactly, because it just it comes from like I said a place of respect and love for you all. Because I do follow a lot of women on Twitter in general that I really admire. I think I don't know. I would have to look at my follow list, but I think I might follow more women than men on there. But I do follow a lot of guys too. I don't. But so it just made sense to do that kind of theme, and it went from one post to two posts. Now I'm three posts in. I think last night, I had 47 women, which is the most I've ever done.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
great.
So it just keeps, I keep finding people, and it keeps just getting bigger every single week.
That's really cool.
So how are you doing this weekend?
Oh my goodness. Well, I'm on break, so my classes finally ended on this week seems like they ended Monday. So this week is crazy because I got a new puppy on Tuesday. So I'm sleep deprived because I am trying to acclimate this crazy dog into my life, but I'm hoping that I can catch up on some movies that I was too busy to get to when I was, trying to get through with my classes. So I'm happy. I'm trying to, settle in. I film Twitter's been a little bit crazy as of late. So I've not been as totally active with all of the fighting with Marriage Story and then before that, The Irishman. And it was just like, my gosh, people, can't we all just get along?
Yeah, I would assume that this weekend isn't anything special for you theatrically, because I know you don't care about Star Wars. You probably don't care about Cats. You probably don't care about any of the other blockbusters released in
Although
time for Christmas.
I must say that the reviews of Cats have me a little bit interested. All of the references to David Lynch and, just how it's this, like magical, surrealistic nightmare that might actually get me to go and see it.
Because the funny thing is, even though the reviews for Cats are worse, I feel like people have a better disposition after seeing Cats than they have after seeing the new Star Wars movie.
Yeah. And it's interesting too, because I know that, it's no secret. I, kind of muted the Star Wars and the Mandalorian and all that. I don't let people like what they like. I'm so far out of the loop with that. I couldn't even have a convo on it. But a lot of my Facebook friends who are non-film people really like the new movie. They're, giving it really good reviews. So obviously there's got to be something positive about it. So I have seen some non-professional film people. They seem to really like it.
Yeah, it's been mixed for me because I follow a lot of critics on there too, and there's people I respect who love it and people I respect who hate it. So I'm not 100% sure what to think when I go in. I know my family is obviously planning to watch it all together at some point next week over the Christmas holiday.
Oh, nice. Are you a go to the movies on Christmas kind of person?
Sometimes we don't always do that. I don't. We did not do that last year. We did that 2 years ago when the last Star Wars movie came out. I,
Nice.
we just feel kind of bad because that's definitely an industry, obviously, that never stops. So they're always open on Christmas. They're always open on Thanksgiving. They never get the luxury of that holiday. So I always feel kind of bad.
I actually worked at a movie theater here, and I live right outside of Detroit. I worked at a indie movie theater back in the late 90s, and I would, put me on any holiday, that's fine, I don't mind. And I I worked my fair share of, Thanksgivings and New Year's Eves, and it's kind of fun.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No, I can imagine that. Like, if you're young and single and you just want to work at the movie
Exactly.
theater, I mean, that's fine. But at the same time, I feel kind of bad because there are definitely probably some people working there that are like, I don't want to be here today.
Right. Yeah, I get it for sure. I would like to go see the new Terrence Malick. I know I just noticed today that it's playing near me, Hidden Life. So that might actually be something that I would consider doing on even the day before Christmas Eve, or Christmas Eve, if I get done with my family obligations early.
Yeah, I think that's playing down the street for me sometime this week. I think either this week or next week. I can't remember, but that's playing at the because 2 blocks away from where I'm recording right now is a little Nickelodeon theater,
Oh,
and so
nice.
I think they're gonna be playing that. I know they're playing Cats. I saw the marquee when I was walking down, which is kind of
Oh,
weird because that's usually not the type of movie they play there because it's a little bigger.
right. Yeah, they're usually more indie.
Exactly. So, but yeah, I know it's playing around here. I'm not sure if I should go see it in a theater. I know I'm most likely going to get a screener for it next month when the Spirit
Oh,
Awards
cool.
screeners get sent out.
That's nice.
Yeah, so I'm not sure. I know I should definitely because I always tell myself this every year because I've been doing this for a few years now with the Spirit Awards, where I say, okay, I should get a head start. There's a few movies that are streaming already. I should get a head start before all the screeners get sent out, and then I won't feel overwhelmed. And then I always forget to do that, and then I just feel overwhelmed when I get 30 movies all at once.
I bet. Yeah, it's one. Well, I do a lot of film festival judging. I have a lot of colleagues that teach at different universities in Michigan, and a lot of them do film festivals. So I help them out, and I always feel really excited. Like, yes, send me all the prospective films, and I'll watch them, and then I'll get the email, and it's like, okay, you have like 30 movies you have to watch now. They're not feature length, but yeah, it always gets a little overwhelming when you actually have to sit down and do it.
Exactly. So I do want to ask, what was it about film that wanted to, get you into it? Like, was there a specific year that you kind of your eyes, opened up about film? Was there like a specific movie or movies at all?
Yeah, for sure. That's a really good question. I had kind of an interesting upbringing. My father was really into, I mean, I was born in 71. So growing up in the, by the time I got into the late 70s and into the 80s, when I was still, a child, and he was really into midnight movies and cult movies and art movies. And so he was, like they took me to see Rocky Horror when I was 5 or 6, and covered my eyes over all the parts I, wasn't supposed to see. So as a kid, films were something that, I kind of always loved. And then for me personally, I saw Clockwork Orange when I was probably 15. I want to say I was babysitting, and, this family had a bunch of random VHS tapes, and I would, just pop them in and watch them. And most of them were, pretty benign, like weird science and things like that. But somehow they had a copy of A Clockwork Orange. And that was really, for me, the first movie that just kind of blew my mind. It opened my eyes. It was something that I was like, whoa, I did not know film could do this. And it really kind of set me down my own path with film that, kind of forked away from my father's emphasis. And he was, very into like Ingmar Bergman and, esoteric things. And it kind of got me on my way in my own interest. And so that was something that A Clockwork Orange, I tell my students, it's not my favorite movie, and that I certainly couldn't watch it all the time. It's obviously very intense, but that was the film that kind of started me on my journey that, got me to studying film and ultimately teaching film at a college level.
All right. I think it's interesting that you bring up Clockwork Orange because obviously that's a Kubrick film, and he was definitely one of the very few auteur directors I think around that time that was definitely allowed to kind of get really weird, but at the same time still be a part of the, mainstream consciousness. Obviously, one of the first ones would probably be Alfred Hitchcock. Obviously, if we're gonna, if we're not talking about like the silent era, obviously there's more in that era. But if we're talking about like more of the talkie era, I guess you can call it, that we're in, you could think of like Hitchcock and Stanley Kubrick as like the very few that were allowed to kind of do what they needed to do to tell the stories they wanted to tell, but at the same time, the mainstream somehow actually accepted them.
Yeah, it's really interesting because if you think about Orson Welles and Citizen Kane as being this, oh my gosh, here's this outsider coming in and he's going to get this, sweetheart deal, and RKO is giving him all the freedom and all the secrecy, kind of a cautionary tale. It is interesting that Kubrick was able to make films like A Clockwork Orange in 2001: A Space Odyssey and Doctor Strangelove, because I think by today's standards, and maybe we're just kind of programmed to see how commercial Hollywood has become, but by today's standards, yeah, they're pretty out there.
Exactly. And I mean, it does kind of worry me a bit when I think about stuff like this, because people will often say, movies aren't allowed to be as weird or interesting as they used to. But I feel like when people say things like that, they're thinking more so in like the mainstream
Right.
way that movies are presented. Because when you think about, like, people are talking about like Cats this week, and they're like, well, Cats is allowed to be weird. You should support that because they can't make weird movies anymore. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, this is the same year where we had a movie where a woman buys a dress that tries to kill people.
Oh, I loved that movie, by the way. I just watched In Fabric and I absolutely loved it. It was it was ridiculous, but I loved it. I thought it was great, and I completely agree with you. And I mean, even something like Jojo Rabbit, which I think is, hilarious, since it's technically a Disney movie, right? So certainly we do have examples, kind of all across the board of films that are allowed to be weird or, be risky and take risks. And I wish more big movies would do that. So maybe Cats is you know, the thing we need right now.
Maybe, but I don't. I just think it's interesting because it's funny when you think about it. When people, will reference older, cult movies from like the '60s, '70s, '80s, even before that, like, oh, these were allowed to, take risks and be weird. But I'm thinking you have to remember those movies also didn't get big 3,000 screen releases.
Sure.
And
Yeah,
you could say
absolutely.
that for the, the weird small movies that are coming out today. And a lot of those movies people, discovered on home video when home video blew up in the 80s and became, VHS staples. And I mean, obviously, streaming and, Redbox and whatnot are doing that, now. But I just think it's funny the way people frame things. Just because something isn't playing at the AMC or the Regal means it's not having the same impact as something that does.
Right. Yeah. And it's interesting because, I teach at a community college. So right now, currently, it tends to kind of ebb and flow. But currently, because the economy is pretty good, most of my students are, they're younger. They're around college age. So they're, 18 to, maybe 24. And it is rare. I'll get a one or two that might be really into the similar things that I'm into. But for the most part, I find that the average person, they're not aware of what's playing outside the multiplex. So I try really hard to, get them to, hey, watch The Last Black Man of San Francisco, right? That's streaming on Prime. I try to get them to, and if it can be free, even better, right? Because they're probably not going to want to spend their own money on something their teacher is recommending to them. So I try really hard to expose them to, things outside of the mainstream. And typically they respond in a really positive way to. I volunteer at the Traverse City Film Festival every year. That's here in Michigan. That's the film festival that Michael Moore founded. And then as festival season starts to kick off, I really rely on film Twitter a lot because I'm getting back into the classroom. I can't, even though it's close to me, I can never get up to Toronto or, a lot of the film festivals around. So I will start to see, the films that are getting buzz this year. It was, Parasite and Jojo Rabbit and Marriage Story. And that really helps me out. So for people that, maybe aren't seeking out smaller indie films on their own, and their algorithms on whatever streaming service they have are going to recommend them suggestions based on their watches. Yeah, I kind of feel like I'm taking up the mantle in a lot of ways to help get my students to see things that they may not normally seek out, whether it's at home or in the theater. And it's something that film Twitter really helps me out with a lot. My biggest issue is just being impatient, and I still haven't seen Portrait of a Lady on Fire, and I'm going crazy. I want to see it so badly.
I think it's interesting that you bring up Parasite because I saw that, like I said, at the Nickelodeon that's down the block from me. And usually when I go see movies down there, it'll be me and like four or five, maybe 10 people at the most. But when I went to go see that, this screening was utterly packed on like a Saturday afternoon. I think it was like a 2 o'clock showing or something like that. And I had, my whole row was filled up, the whole screen, was filled up, and I think it's really interesting that that movie is being touted as something extremely, relevant and original. Which, I mean, to an extent, it very much is. Like, I very much enjoyed Parasite. It's going to be in my top 10 for the year. But I think it's really interesting that when I went on Criterion Channel, I think it was earlier this month or last month, when I had watched Gold Diggers in 1933 for the first time. The funny thing is, if you compare the first about 45 minutes or so of each movie, they actually match up pretty closely. And it's just kind of funny how we've been talking about, like, as a society, how we've been dealing with certain issues for the past, 80 years. But, when you see Parasite, a lot of people call it kind of a more relevant movie.
Yeah, and I have to revisit. I saw your tweets about Gold Diggers, and obviously I love all the Busby Berkeley stuff. It's so visually stunning and compelling. So I need to revisit because it's been a while since I've watched it. Yeah, I had the same experience with Parasite. I think I went on a Tuesday afternoon, and usually same thing for me. I love to go during the day. My schedule usually allows, and so typically it's me and a couple of random senior citizens. But I went on a Tuesday afternoon at 1, and it was pretty crowded. So
Yeah, I mean, but that's a good thing. I really hope Parasite gets a Best Picture nomination. Obviously, will most likely be in foreign film, probably with the Portrait of a Lady on Fire as well. That's been definitely getting a lot of buzz. I don't think it's going to come around here till like February, though. I think I'm getting a screener for that for Spirit Awards as well. We'll see. It matters based on the studio whether or not they feel the need to send me one.
okay.
And then, of course, I really hope Pain and Glory also could
Oh,
get at least a foreign film nomination, but so far it's not really looking like it. The Spirit Awards even snubbed that, and that's starting to scare me because that really is my favorite movie of the year, and I think Almodovar really deserves recognition for that one.
I wish I'd see. I haven't seen it yet. I really hope I can get my eyes on it soon because huge fan of his, obviously, and so that would be yeah, something that I would really love to see sooner than later.
Oh, it's definitely worth it. The first screening I went to of it, I had to leave the county. When I took two buses and a lift just to go see it because I desperately wanted to watch it because it wasn't gonna come here for like another month. So I went all the way over the hill, like past San Jose, to an AMC just to go see Pain and Glory. And it's very much worth it. It's definitely one of his best films. It's very emotional, very personal. I mean, I honestly can't recommend it enough. And obviously, I know I'm a little biased because he's one of my favorite directors of all time. And so, obviously, I'm gonna recommend it higher than other people will. But I adore that movie.
I've heard really good things, so yeah, that's another one that's definitely high on my list to see. I feel all in all, it's actually been a really good year for film. It's been I saw Jojo Rabbit, which I adored. I laughed, I cried. was it was really good. It was really engaging, and yeah, I've had a really fun time this year exploring film, and I think award seasons, I mean, I know we're already leading into it, but I think it's going to be really interesting because there's not at this point, I don't think one, like film that's really kind of coveting all the nominations. I feel like it might kind of be, all over the place.
Exactly. That's the same way I felt last year that there were no front runners really until the very end. And obviously, depending on who you ask, that might have not been for the best because there are definitely a couple movies that people, did not like that obviously received a lot of praise. So I don't know. It'll be interesting to see where it goes. I think definitely Baumbach and Greta Gerwig are both going to be at the Oscars together, nominated. Obviously, I'm hoping for Almodovar. Obviously, Parasite. I think again Bong Joon Ho definitely deserves the praise and definitely a Best Director nomination. And then obviously hoping that there is at least one Best Director that is a woman this year. That would be very nice, especially because again there are so many women that deserve it.
Yeah, it would be interesting to see if it would be Gerwig again, and then obviously it's always cool to have a couple, a married couple, or a co-parenting couple. I don't know if they're actually legally married, but Bombeck and Gerwig, if they were actually both nominated, in the same category for Best Director, that's, of course, selfishly, I'm always going to root for the woman. Although I'm a huge Bombeck fan, so yeah, it'd be interesting to see how that shakes out.
No, I mean I don't blame you at all, definitely, because I mean obviously we've only had one female best director, and as much as I admire her, she's never been my favorite. I've always felt very, mixed feelings about her filmography. I still need to watch Near Dark. Obviously, that's on my Criterion channel watch list. I love Point Break. I tried watching Zero Dark 30. I didn't really dig that one too much. I don't. I'm mixed. So it'd be nice to get some more, female directors in
Yeah,
that kind of exclusive club.
it is interesting because with Catherine Bigelow and you know, full disclosure, seeing a movie about the social unrest in Detroit as being somebody who's from Detroit, you're going in, it's going to be very hard to please. And I was terribly disappointed with the film, but it's interesting because her filmography as a woman, and I know this might just be my own interpretation, is, how do I say this? It's kind of masculine. I know that might be, I know that, films don't have genders, but it seems like in her career, she's made a lot of films that focus on male protagonists and telling male stories. And so it's almost like, she got the nod for, The Hurt Locker, which was a very well put together film, but there were no female characters in that movie. I mean, there was like a wife, or people were criticizing The Irishman for not letting the women talk, but uh, you know, I don't remember a female character aside from a very small snippet of a wife talking. Having a female character. So it is interesting that Bigelow was, the only woman to win a Best Directing Academy Award for her male centric kind of body of work.
No, I would actually agree with you on that. I think there are definitely masculine and feminine movies, and that doesn't obviously necessarily equate to the gender of the director themselves. Like you can look at something like Crazy Rich Asians, and you can argue that is more of a feminine film more than a masculine film. Obviously, even though it has a male director, John M. Chu. And then yeah, you can look at it, some of Catherine Bigelow's movies and argue something, yeah, like Point Break or what she won best director for is definitely more masculine. I mean maybe that's just the way she likes to direct movies. Maybe she feels like that's the only way she can get a seat at the table. I'm not sure, obviously. But it's definitely interesting, yeah, when you look at it from that way, because I think there's definitely masculine movies and feminine movies, but not necessarily based on the gender of the director.
Yeah, good point. And I mean, right. I mean, it's not fair. I mean, men have been telling, women's stories forever. So I'm certainly not saying that as a woman you have to tell the story of a woman, but it's just interesting because when you said getting a seat at the table, it does kind of make me wonder, is that why she did get a seat at the table? Will Gerwig get a seat at the table again, and this time with Little Women, or is that going to kind of be put aside because, obviously it's another, reinterpretation of the novel, and that might not be in the wheelhouse of, all of the Academy voters. So it will be interesting for sure to see.
Exactly. And I just want to chime in again. I I don't think necessarily to she has to necessarily tell women's stories. Because, like I said, if you look again at John M. Chu, he has the new movie In the Heights coming out, which is a very Latinx central film that definitely tells, a Latinx story. And even though he, is an Asian film director, he's still kind of using his experiences in life as someone who is, a part of a minority to kind of give his perspective on that type of story. So even if, Catherine Bigelow necessarily, isn't telling a story with a female main character, I mean, she could definitely, add her perspective as a woman. Obviously, I think someone like Deborah Granite or Chloe Zhao does that a little bit better, where they can have male protagonists, but it's not necessarily told in a way that a male director would. If you look at something like, Leave No Trace or Chloe
Ah,
Zhao's The Writer.
Leave No Trace it was one of my favorite films last year. It is such an incredible film. And I felt so terrible because I think it played here at the theater, my little indie theater for, I mean, maybe a week, and I missed it, of course, because it was in the summer. And when I finally caught it on Amazon Prime, and it just blew me away. And it was so cool to see Thomasina in Jojo Rabbit. It took me a while. I actually had to Google it to figure out. I'm like, where have I seen this? This young woman before? And then it was like, oh yeah, Leave No Trace. Yeah, she handles her all of her characters. You can really see the, just the thoughtfulness and the care that she puts into them. That film was, chronically underappreciated in my opinion.
Exactly. I didn't get to see in the theater either. I had heard the name, I had heard people talking about Leave No Trace, but that wasn't something I got to see until I got the screener for it for the Spirit Awards. And I just want to say, I hope nobody thinks, listen to this, that I don't like Catherine Bigelow. Like I said, I admire her as a director. I just want to see a film from her that doesn't feel as calculated as her last films have been, a film where you can kind of let the reins off and really let her do whatever she wants without the expectation of box office or awards prestige attached to it.
Yeah, sure. I mean, more power to her. And, she is the only woman to win an Academy Award for Best Director. And certainly she should be and is, a historic achievement for her. I don't dislike all of her body of work. I actually really enjoyed The Hurt Locker. I really enjoyed the editing and the visual style, the cinematography. The acting was strong. And so she's definitely a female director that I admire. It's just interesting when in a context when we're thinking about, who gets recognized and who doesn't, and the types of films that they make.
Exactly. I mean, I'm just saying, like, I feel like ever since she won Best Director, because she is the only female Best Director winner, I feel like every movie that gets released uh, from her by a studio has that kind of expectation of, well, this has to be nominated, right? I mean, you won Best Director before, you have to make a movie up to that caliber. You have to make that type of awards movie because we're going to release it at the end of the year, and that's what the last couple releases have seemed like. I watched the trailers of them, because, like I said, I've only seen a few of her films, but when I see the trailer for like Detroit Earth Dark 30, it definitely feels like something that's aware that it has to be an awards contender.
Yeah, that's a lot of pressure. And speaking of, awards contender, I'm really excited and I can't wait to see 1917. The cinematography just looks outstanding. I watched a little vignette about the making of, and obviously, with Roger Deakins, and then seemingly having it be, done with one tracking shot. It just, there's obviously, they know why they're releasing it at the end of, so close to the end of the year. And I think there's a lot of expectation on it. I don't know whether or not it's going to live up to the hype and the expectation, but I'm really interested to obviously go see that in the theater.
Yeah, that looks interesting to me. I like Sam Mendes quite a bit. Obviously, I like his, time directing James Bond. I think it's funny because a lot of people are comparing 1917 to Dunkirk, and I have a feeling. I mean, I don't think they're necessarily going to be similar in tone or story or anything, but I think definitely these are two films that are probably more so going to be about the experience of watching them in the
Yes.
theater necessarily more so than the story being told. And I'm okay with that.
Yeah, me too. And I did see Dunkirk in the theater, and it was such a great experience. And it's very rare that, when a film is ending, I was in Dunkirk, I was like, wow, I wish this movie were longer. I wanna build this out a little bit. It did definitely seem like, I don't know how much, editing was done or how much revision was done, but it definitely, the visuals and the, obviously the soundtrack were, the score were incredible, but I wanted more. I wanted I wanted to keep going. So it'll be interesting to see. Obviously the parallels are there with 1917. But yes, if I'm going to go to the theater and something is visually compelling, I don't necessarily have a problem with the story not being as, intricate when we're focusing on another element of it. And so I'm excited to see 1917 in a, a nice big screen with a comfy seat.
Yeah, definitely. And then as we're recording this yesterday, the trailer for the new Christopher Nolan movie Tenet came out. Have you seen that trailer?
I haven't, and so I will definitely. I've seen some tweets about it. I've been, as I mentioned at the top of the interview, I just got this new puppy, so I'm sleep deprived. I haven't been on Twitter that much for the next 2 days, so I'm excited to watch the trailer for it. I don't know much about it, and it's odd because I didn't know he had a new film coming out.
Yeah, I've seen a little bit of the promotion over the last couple months. I didn't realize it was already done filming because like the name and logo had just been announced, I think, a couple weeks ago. So it was very interesting to have seen a trailer yesterday morning. I think definitely even after you see the trailer, you're not 100% sure what it's about either. It's definitely going that Inception route, and definitely a lot of people are comparing it to Inception. Um,
Interesting.
but definitely it's very much I think it's interesting when directors do this. It feels like he's definitely revisiting certain themes and revisiting certain the things that he's done before. There's definitely an element of a memento in this film. I won't spoil it too much. I'll let you enjoy the trailer.
Yeah, for sure.
But
Thanks.
I think it's interesting because, like I said, even Almodovar will do this. Well, he'll take a theme or a story or a character arc, and you can tell he's kind of trying it out for the first time, and then he'll do it like a decade later again, and you kind of see the more revisionist aspect to it, but like in a good way, as if you're seeing like his process on screen. And that's how I feel about Tenet. Is like, well, I did Memento and I did Inception, I did these other movies, and this is kind of a culmination of me taking certain ideas and themes and kind of doing them all together again.
That's interesting. Yeah, and it's cool when I mean, we get to the point with a director when we can say, oh, that's, a very Nolan-esque way to, deal with time, or, he obviously his spatial realities and a film like Memento and Interstellar, and even Dunkirk to a certain extent, his narrative time is something that's, very constructive, and he's playing around with it. And so, yeah, it's interesting to see. I've been following Nolan. I have a ton of respect for Christopher Nolan just because, he shoots on film and he has a love of avant-garde. He produced a documentary about the Quay brothers, who are, I don't know if you're familiar with them, but they're twins. They're Americans, but they live in England, and they make this incredible stop motion animation films, short films, for the most part, but they work with composers, and they're incredible. And Christopher Nolan put together this documentary about him because he's a huge fan of their work. So for me, it gets me really excited because when I do teach, I teach my students about film. I teach them about photochemical film in addition to obviously, the technology that we have today. So somebody like Christopher Nolan, is still wanting to use, celluloid instead of shooting in a digital format, makes the film teacher and me really excited. A similar director would be somebody like David Fincher. And I feel like he's so hit or miss with me, but there's always like this, expectation that, it's gotta be, it's gotta be really hard as a director if you're expected to make, masterpiece after masterpiece. It's not necessarily always possible. So I think Nolan and Fincher, directors that, kind of have had these accolades in the past, there's a lot of pressure on them to always deliver. And, you can't always do that.
Exactly. Again, and that brings up the kind of point we were talking about earlier about how auteur directors kind of bleed into the mainstream. And I think you can definitely say that about Christopher Nolan, how he kind of just wants to do what he wants each movie and experiment a little bit. And there is sadly that kind of expectation because his work has appealed to the mainstream in the past.
Yeah. And it's interesting too. I think of, Darren Aronofsky's Mother and how it was being marketed as a kind of a straight horror film. And so a lot of people that, weren't necessarily familiar with his work were, oh my gosh, yeah, Jennifer Lawrence is in it. And they were expecting a straightforward horror film. And then they just got this really avant-garde, abstract. I loved it. I saw it in the theater, but it was interesting because the people around me were just utterly baffled, and I could hear them, kind of making comments under their breath as they were leaving, like, what was that? So it is interesting when a director, whether it's, a sustained attention like Nolan gets, or someone like Aronofsky, who doesn't always get the attention, when they decide to go outside of a conventional narrative, it doesn't always connect.
Exactly. I loved Mother as well. I didn't see it in the theater, but I saw it when it came to Hulu, and I watched it with my sister, and I definitely liked it more than she did. But yeah, you can definitely tell there were people that came into that movie thinking, okay, this is the guy that made Black Swan, which I know Black Swan has definitely some out there things in it, but it's definitely more mainstream than Mother could ever hope to be, and so that probably threw a lot of people off.
Yeah, and I just think it's interesting to kind of see, with these directors, as time passes and through bodies of work. And I've kind of always want to pay attention to, who made the film. I'm much more interested in who's directing than who's, starring, or other aspects of that. And it is interesting, and I'd say in the past decade, to see that, because I feel like 1999 was really a turning point, one of the last years where most of the films coming out, we had all these original stories coming out. And now we're in this franchise era, and so it's got to be hard for auteur directors, whether mainstream or not, to get their films made when they're trying to tell an original story, because studios don't necessarily want to support that nowadays.
Exactly. Alrighty. So, we're gonna have to go now. I think that was a really good conversation.
Yeah, I really had a great time. It was wonderful because nothing was pre-planned or scripted, and so it was, for me, the best part about talking about film with another film person is, just the spontaneous nature of the conversation. It can kind of go anywhere, but it's always very enjoyable for me. So thank you for the invite. I really appreciate you reaching out to me and having me on your podcast.
Alrighty. So, I think this is where we say goodbye to everybody. Bye.
Bye. Merry Christmas. Happy New Year. Happy holidays, whatever holidays you celebrate.